Hey there, everyone. It's Mr. Lane here, and in this lecture, we will cover Romanticism, Realism, and photography in Europe and America from 1800 to 1870. Take good notes, and let's begin. Our key ideas include realism, where subjects were painted from everyday life in a naturalistic manner. The artists were concerned for the plight of the working class and laborers. Next, there's Romanticism, where you have the individuality and sense of freedom, emotions, and imagination over reason, and landscapes, where the soul is painted to represent the natural world. There's an introduction of photography. And finally, the French Revolution broke out in 1789, which brings about an interest in the Greek ideal of liberty and democracy. Here's our list of key terms. And these are all the artworks we will be analyzing. Political, industrial, and artistic revolutions. After Napoleon's death, the political geography of Europe changed dramatically, as you can see on the map here. But in many ways, the more significant changes during the first half of the 19th century were technology and the economy. The Industrial Revolution caused a population boom in European cities, and railroads spread to many parts of the continent, facilitating the transportation of both goods and people. Our first style of art is Romanticism. Key features include the past. There was a longing for the medieval past. And in pre-industrial Europe, Gothic architecture will be revived. Irrational, inner mind, insanity. Romantic artists depict the human psyche in topics that transcend the use of reason. One romantic artist, Jericho, chose to depict portraits of people in an insane asylum. Nature. There was a longing for the purity of nature, which defies human rationality. And lastly, emotion, exotic. Romantics favored emotion and passion over reason. Exotic themes and locales were also popular because they did not adhere to European emphasis on rationality. Our first artist, Ingres, was David's most famous student. Ingres arrived at David's studio in the late 1790s, after Gerard Trilson had left to establish an independent career. Ingres' study there was to be short-lived. However, as he soon broke with David's matter of style, Ingres adopted what he believed to be a truer and purer Greek style than David's neoclassical manner. The younger artist employed linear forms approximating those found in Greek face painting, and often placed the main figures in the foreground of his composition, emulating classical low-relief sculpture. Ingres was also influenced by Titian. The Grand Odalisque was painted for Napoleon's sister, Caroline, who lived between 1782 and 1839 and was the Queen of Naples. The subject, the reclining nude female figure, followed the grand tradition of antiquity and the Renaissance. Odalisque means woman in a harem. The definition of a harem is a quarters in a Muslim home where wives, concubines, and female servants live, or a group of women who share one man. If you look at her body, it's distorted and elongated. She has a turban on her head. By converting the figure to an odalisque, Ingres made a strong concession to the burgeoning Romantic taste for Orientalistic subjects. Some of the subject matter in the painting can be considered exotic or from the Orient. For example, the peacock fan, the turban, the enormous pearls, the hookah, and of course the title of the painting, all refer us to the French conception of the Orient. Careful, the word Orient does not refer here to the Far East so much as the Near East or even North Africa. It's referring more so to the countries of Asia. Our next artist, Goya, is regarded as the most important Spanish artist of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Over the course of his long career, Goya moved from jolly and lighthearted to deeply pessimistic and searching in his paintings, drawings, etchings, and frescoes. Born in Fuentedotos, he later moved with his parents to Zaragoza and at age 14 began studying with the painter José Martínez from 1710 to 1785. In 1746, the year of Goya's birth, the Spanish crown was under the rule of Ferdinand. Subsequently, the Bourbon king Charles III ruled the country as an enlightened monarch, sympathetic to change, employing ministers who supported radical economic, industrial, and agricultural reform. Goya came to artistic maturity during this age of enlightenment. Goya, the 3rd of May, 1808. Much of Goya's multifaceted work deals not with romantic fantasies, but with contemporary events. The Spanish people, finally recognizing the French as invaders, sought a way to expel the foreign troops. On May 2, 1808, Spaniards attacked Napoleon's soldiers in a chaotic and violent clash. In retaliation, and as a show of force, the French responded the next day by rounding up and executing Spanish citizens. Goya encouraged empathy for the Spanish peasants massacred on May 3rd by portraying horrified expressions on their faces, endowing them with humanity lacking in the French firing squad. Moreover, the peasant about to be shot throws his arms out in a cruciform gesture reminiscent of Christ's position on the cross. Here's a link to a video that gives you a deeper analysis of the 3rd of May. In a tragically brief career lasting only a dozen years, Géricault had a major influence on the course of French painting in the 19th century. Independently wealthy, he spent only a short time as an apprentice in painting studios, preferring to learn his craft by studying in the Louvre. The former royal palace then housed the recently installed Musée Napoleon and its treasure trove of works by Jan van Eyck, Titian, Caravaggio, Rembrandt, and Peter Paul Rubens, which the emperor had triumphantly brought to Paris as the spoils of his successful military campaigns. Géricault was drawn especially to Rubens, in whose canvases the young painter saw an alternative to the classical compositions, smooth finish, and invisible brushstrokes of David. Géricault also studied Renaissance and Baroque art in Florence, Rome, and Naples in 1816 on a self-funded trip to Italy. In July of 1816, a French naval ship, the Medusa, was on its way to Senegal carrying the new governor of the colony, his family, and some other government officials. Another group aboard the ship was composed of reformers and abolitionists who hoped to eliminate the practice of slavery in Senegal by engaging the local Senegalese and the French colonists in the development of an agricultural cooperation that would make the colony self-sustaining. The captain of the Medusa accidentally ran the ship aground on a sandbar off the coast of West Africa. The ship's carpenter could not repair the Medusa, and the decision was made to put the governor, his family, and other high-ranking passengers into the 6 lifeboats. The remaining 150 passengers found themselves packed onto a raft made by the carpenter from the mast of the Medusa. The group on the raft included lower-ranking military men, colonists, and sailors of European and African descent. The overcrowded makeshift raft, just 65 by 23 feet, was lashed to the lifeboats. But it impeded the progress, so the more elite passengers in the boat took axes and cut the lines to the raft, casting it adrift. 150 people were abandoned at sea. Starvation, murder, cannibalism. Some people intentionally took their lives, and the artist made a full-scale model in his studio. The canvas is massive, measuring just over 16 by 23 feet, so large that Jericho had to rent a studio big enough to house it as he worked. At the bottom left are those who have lost hope and the already dead. A gray-haired, bearded man, clad in a red head covering, sits on the raft with his head resting on his right hand. His left hand grasps the torso of a pale young man, presumably his dead son, whose limp, alabaster body remains precariously extended on the edge of the raft. The man at top, waving a piece of red and white fabric, is signaling to a tiny ship in the background. Of the 150 people aboard the raft, 15 were rescued by the Argus, the ship that we can see barely at the back of the canvas, and only 10 ultimately survived to tell the tale of cannibalism, murder, and other horrors aboard the raft. The bodies were based on ancient Greek and Roman sculptures. Do you hear the people sing? Singing a song of angry men. It is the music of a people who will not be slaves again. Delacroix's painting, Liberty Leading the People, at first seems to be overpowered by chaos, but on closer inspection, it is a composition filled with subtle order. The first thing a viewer may notice is the monumental and nude to the waist female figure. She wears atop her head a Phrygian cap, a classical signifier of freedom. This is an important bit of costuming. In ancient Rome, freed slaves were given one to wear to indicate their newly liberated status. And this headwear became a symbol of freedom and liberty on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean during the 18th and 19th centuries. Here's a link to a video that gives you a deeper analysis of Liberty Leading the People. Landscape painting came into its own in the 19th century as a fully independent and respected genre. Already in the 18th century, artists had regarded the pleasurable, aesthetic mood that natural landscape inspired as making the landscape itself picturesque. That is, worthy of being painted. Rather than simply describe nature, Romantic poets and artists often use nature as allegory. In this manner, artists commented on spiritual, moral, historical, or philosophical issues. Landscape painting was a particularly effective vehicle for such commentary. Here we have Fredericks Abbey in the Oak Forest. For Frederick, the personal experience of nature led to a deeper understanding of God, nature's creator. We see leafless oaks of a snow-covered cemetery and a procession of monks that bear a coffin into the ruins of a Gothic church. The painting is a kind of meditation on human mortality. The artist should not only paint what he sees before him, but also what he sees within him. Frederick was a master of the romantic transcendental landscape. The reverential mood of his winter scene with a ruined Gothic church and cemetery demands the silence appropriate to sacred places. Next, we have Turner, the slave ship. The essence of Turner's innovative style is the emotive power of color. He released color from any defining outlines to express both the forces of nature and the painter's emotional response to them. Its subject is a 1783 incident reported in an extensively read book titled The History of the Abolition of the Slave Trade by Thomas Clarkson. Because the book had just been reprinted in 1839, Clarkson's account probably prompted Turner's choice of subject for this 1840 painting. The incident involved the captain of a slave ship who, on realizing that his insurance company would reimburse him only for slaves lost at sea, but not for those who died en route, ordered the sick and dying slaves thrown overboard. Another example of landscape painting is Thomas Cole, The Oxbow. Although, or perhaps because he was born in England, Thomas Cole, the most prominent member of the Hudson River School of Landscape Painting, best defined those qualities that distinguished American landscapes from European ones. In his essay on American scenery, published in the January 1836 issue of American Monthly Magazine, Cole described the unique nature of the American countryside. Cole championed the idea of America having a landscape distinct from Europe's. Here, he contrasted dark wilderness on the left and sunlit civilization on the right, with a minuscule painter at the bottom center. Now moving into the genre of realism. Advances in industrial technology during the early 19th century reinforced the Enlightenment faith in the connection between science and progress. Realist artists argued that only the thing of one's own time, what people could see for themselves, were real. Accordingly, realists focused their attention on the experiences and sights of everyday contemporary life and disapproved of historical and fictional subjects on the grounds that they were neither real, invisible, nor of the present. Courbet, the Stonebreakers. The realists' sincerity about scrutinizing their environment led them to paint mundane and trivial subjects that artists had traditionally deemed unworthy of depiction. For example, working class laborers and peasants. If we look closely at Courbet's painting, The Stonebreakers of 1849, the artist's concern for the plight of the poor is evident. Here, two figures labor to break and remove stone from a road that is being built. In our age of powerful jackhammers and bulldozers, such work is served as punishment for chain gangs. Courbet represented in a straightforward manner, and nearly at life size, two men, one about 70 and the other quite young, in the decidedly non-heroic act of breaking stones to provide paving for roads. By juxtaposing youth and age, Courbet suggested that those born to poverty will remain poor their entire lives. Gustave Courbet on Realism. The academic jury selecting work for the 1855 Salon rejected 3 of the 14 paintings that Gustave Courbet submitted, declaring that his work and figures were too coarse, so much as to be plainly socialistic and too large. Typical of Courbet's work are the Stonebreakers, which depicts menial laborers, and Burial at Ornans, which represents the funeral of an ordinary man and is nearly 22 feet long. In response to the jury's decision, Courbet withdrew all his works, including those that had been accepted, and set up his own exhibition outside the grounds, calling it the Pavilion of Realism, featuring not 14 but 40 of his own works. This was itself a bold action. Courbet was the first artist ever known to have staged a private exhibition of his own work. His pavilion and the statement he issued to explain the paintings shown there were mounted to the Realist movement's manifesto. Although Courbet maintained that he founded no school and was of no school, he did, as the name of his pavilion suggests, accept the term realism as descriptive of his art. The statement that Courbet distributed at his pavilion reads in part, "The title of realist has been imposed upon me. Titles have never given a just idea of things. Were it otherwise, the work would be superfluous. I have studied the art of the ancients and the moderns, avoiding any preconceived system and without prejudice. I have no more wanted to imitate the former than to copy the latter. Nor have I thought of achieving the idle aim of art for art's sake. No, I have simply wanted to draw from a thorough knowledge of tradition, the reasoned and free sense of my own individuality. To be able to translate the customs, ideas, and appearances of my time as I see them, in a word, to create a living art. This has been my aim." 6 years later, on Christmas Day, 1861, Courbet wrote an open letter, published a few days later, and addressed to prospective students. In the letter, the painter reflected on the nature of his art. An artist must apply his personal faculties to the ideas and the events of the times in which he lives. Art and painting should consist only of the representation of things that are visible and tangible to the artist. Every age should be represented only by its own artist, that is to say, by the artist who lived in it. I also maintain that painting is an essentially concrete art form and can consist only of the representation of both real and existing things. An abstract object, not visible, non-existent, is not within the domain of painting. Courbet's most famous statement, however, is his blunt dismissal of academic painting, in which he concisely summed up the core principle of realist painting. "I have never seen an angel. Show me an angel, and I'll paint one." Like Courbet, Millet found his subjects in the people and occupations of the everyday world. Millet was one of the group of French painters of country life who, to be close to their rural subjects, settled near the village of Barbizon in the forest of Fontainebleau. This Barbizon school specialized in detailed pictures of forest and countryside. Millet, their most prominent member, was born into a prosperous farming family in Normandy, but was keenly aware of the hard lot of the country poor. In The Gleaners, he depicted 3 impoverished women, members of the lowest level of peasant society, performing the backbreaking task of gleaning. Landowning nobles traditionally permitted peasants to glean or collect the wheat scraps left in the field after the harvest. Millet characteristically placed his large figures in the foreground against a broad sky. Although the field stretches back to a rim of haystacks, cottages, trees, and distant workers in a flat horizon, the gleaners quietly doing their tedious and time-consuming work dominate the canvas. It is hard to imagine a sharper contrast with the almost invisible agricultural workers and constables haywaying. Lithography is Greek for stone writing and is a printmaking technique. Realist artist Daumier was a defender of the urban working class, and in his art boldly confronted authority with social criticism and political protest. He used the recent inventions of lithography to reach a wide audience. This print records the horrific 1834 massacre in a workers' housing block. The title refers to the day when, on that street in Paris, an unknown sniper killed a civil guard, part of a government force trying to repress a workers' demonstration. Because the fatal shot had come from a workers' housing block, the remaining guards immediately stormed the building and massacred all of its inhabitants. They killed the man you see here, who was paralyzed, in his bed. And on the left, you see his wife and child, who are also deceased. Today, such an event would still be covered by newspapers, but also on social media and on cell phone cameras. But in 1834, it fell to Paris's renowned printmaker, Daumier, to show the Parisians just what had happened. But how? How do you show a massacre? And what would be the risk of publishing a print that challenged the government so directly? Rosa Bonheur was the most celebrated woman artist of the 19th century. A realist, she went to great lengths to record accurately the anatomy of living horses, even studying carcasses in slaughterhouses. Here's a link to a video that gives you a more in-depth analysis of Rosa Bonheur's The Horse Fair. Our last genre, photography. A technological device of immense consequence for the modern experience was invented shortly before the mid-19th century, the camera, with its attendant art of photography. The relative ease of the process, even in its earliest and most primitive form, seemed a dream come true for 19th century scientists and artists, who for centuries had grappled with less satisfying methods of capturing accurate images of their subjects. Photography also perfectly suited an age that saw artistic patronage continue to shift away from the elite few toward a broader base of support. The growing and increasingly powerful middle class embraced both the comprehensible images of the new medium and its lower cost. For the traditional artist, photography suggested new answers to the great debate about what was real and how to represent the real in art. A daguerreotype is a photograph made by an early method on a plate of chemically treated metal developed by Louis J.M. Daguerre. One of the first plates Daguerre produced after perfecting his new photographic process was this still life, in which he was able to capture amazing detail and finely graduated tones of light and shadow. Daguerre's process completely satisfied all the demands of art, carrying certain essential principles of art to such perfection that it must become a subject of observation and study even to the most accomplished painters. The pictures obtained by this method are as remarkable for the perfection of the details as for the richness and harmony of the general effect. Nature is reproduced in them not only with truth, but also with art. The new wet plate technology so named because the photographic plate was exposed, developed, and fixed while wet, almost at once became the universal way of making negatives until 1880. Wet plate technology enabled photographers to record historical events on the spot and to comment on the high price of war, as in this photograph of dead Union soldiers at Gettysburg in 1863. Of the Civil War photographs, the most moving are the inhumanly objective records of combat deaths. Perhaps the most reproduced of these Civil War photographs is Gardner's print of O'Sullivan's A Harvest of Death, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Although viewers could regard this image as simple reportage, it also functions to impress on people the high price of war. Corpses litter the battlefield as far and wide as the eye can see. As O'Sullivan's photograph modulates from the precise clarity of the bodies of Union soldiers in the foreground, boots stolen and pockets picked to the indistinct corpses in the distance, the suggestion of innumerable other dead soldiers is unavoidable. The realist photographer and scientist Edward Muybridge came to the United States from England in the 1850s and settled in San Francisco, where he established a prominent international reputation for his photographs of the western United States. In 1872, the governor of California, Leland Stanford, sought Muybridge's assistance in settling a bet about whether, at any point in a stride, all 4 feet of a horse galloping at top speed are off the ground. Through his sequential photography, as seen in Horse Galloping, Muybridge proved that racing horses did in fact at times have all 4 feet in midair. This experience was the beginning of Muybridge's photographic studies of the successive stages in human and animal motion, details too quick for the human eye to capture. These investigations culminated in 1885 at the University of Pennsylvania with a series of multiple camera motion studies that produced separate photographs of progressive moments in a single action. Muybridge's discoveries received extensive publicity through the Book of Animal Locomotion, 1887, and his motion photographs earned him a place in the history of science as well as art. Thanks for watching, everyone. Here's some additional resources for you to access.